Want to welcome in a new guest to the Gallen of Questions podcast, a friend of a friend. If you know Sheil Kapadia, then you know the Ringer Philly Special podcast. It's one of the best out there, and this guy joins Sheil every week, and that's why I had to have him on, because if he's a friend of Sheil, he's a friend of mine. Shawn Syed from Sumer Sports. Shawn, so good to meet up with you, and really enjoying your work with Sheil. So I figured, hey, let's talk about some film. Let's talk about some Eagles. Why not?
Pat, that means a lot. I'm really excited to be here and really excited that the Philly film has just really looked good these last few weeks. I'm always excited to talk about the Eagles, especially when they're winning like they are.
Yeah, 8-1. We're coming out of the bye week into maybe the biggest game of the year in the NFL against Kansas City Chiefs, Super Bowl rematch. We all know that here. Philly is, for lack of a better term, lit right now, getting ready for this game on Monday night. We hate to wait an extra day, but it is what it is. So what your specialty is, that I have gleaned from listening to you and Sheil, is you're a film guy. You break down film better than a lot of people. And so I'm interested in what you have seen with the Eagles, specifically on offense. Let's start there. And with Jaylen Herz, because the numbers don't quite look as good as last year, but I don't think it's just as simple as saying, well, he's got more interceptions than last year. You know, obviously he had the knee issue, so he's not running the ball quite as much. But when you break down the film specifically with Hertz, what are you seeing compared to last year, and what are the differences?
You know, Pat, last year we leave that Super Bowl game, and Jaylen Herz, he was on a steady climb throughout the entire year, really, you know, at the top of his game. Then you get to week one this year against the Patriots. You know, clearly not one of the best outputs that he's had, but I actually think Hertz at this point is playing better than he did last year. And that is even with not having the same success that he's had running the ball. So he's had that knee injury that, of course, has hampered him. But he is making throws that, if you look at that Super Bowl game, they look exactly the same. There's a throw to Dallas Goedert against the Commanders this year where he's going across the field, and that's just a beauty. There's that 4th and 3 against the Cowboys where Goddard's kind of running outside. He makes that same throw this year. He made the same throw in the Super Bowl. And then you have that beautiful Devonte Smith touchdown against the Cowboys, and you know, that kind of looks like that throw down the sideline against the Chiefs. So on film, he is really, really aggressive and pushing those matchups in a way that really makes me encouraged. And, you know, I would actually say if you look at the numbers even further, a lot of his numbers do look similar, if not better, than last year. He's really, really improved against the blitz from a number standpoint, where last year he ranked around 27th. And I think that maybe people thought, you know, you get Jaylen Hertz, you blitz him. Now he's ranking 9th in those same kind of production metrics. And then even when it's expected pass situations, he ranks number 1 in the league in those situations. And I think if you think about turnovers a little bit, his interceptable throw rate, it was 2nd in the league last year. It's like upticked a little bit this year, but it would have ranked 2nd in the league last year as well. So on film, he's pushing the ball down the field consistently and giving those great receivers chances to win in one-on-one situations.
And that kind of leads me perfectly to my next question about the offense, which is A.J. Brown, to a lesser extent Devonte Smith, because A.J. Brown has been on another level, was on an absolute heater for 6 weeks, historic numbers through that run. What does he do that separates him from the other wide receivers in the game? Because, you know, he's 6'1", he's like 220 pounds. Not a guy when you stand next to him, you're like, oh my God, this is an overwhelming physical guy. He's not Megatron per se, but the dude just has such great body control. He's so physical, so strong. So when you see what he does on film, what stands out to you?
You know, as much as I love talking about X's and O's or scheme or whatever, it is such a players make plays league. And A.J. Brown just keeps on making those plays. And what I really like about him is he is always going to threaten you vertical. He's going to run at you. He's going to run at you fast. He is a big body, so he's going to push cornerbacks off enough where when you get that 15-yard kind of comeback route, he's going to be wide open because, look, I'm glad that me and you get to talk behind microphones instead of having to cover guys like A.J. Brown, because he can and he doesn't even have to get crazy in-depth into a route tree when, hey, if he can run past you, and then he's going to stop short of you. And that ability is really simple enough for what he's doing. And I do think more recently the Eagles have moved A.J. Brown inside a little bit and used him in the slot in different ways. So I can't speak about it enough. And what I love that he has the advantage of having Devonte Smith on the other side, because, you know, the Kansas City Chiefs are a team you run into on Monday where they have one threat where you're really concerned about that. For Philadelphia, if teams want to double A.J. Brown, Devonte Smith is going to go ahead and have a good day as well.
Yeah, good luck with that. You know, when he first got here at the beginning of last year, I was at training camp, and I noticed that he was working on his body control with this play where they would run like a fade to the back of the end zone, and he wouldn't use his hands, but he would use his body to sort of bump the corner off of him to create that separation. And every time they ran that play, he caught the ball. And I was just so blown away by that, because not every receiver is obviously cerebral enough to be able to do that. They don't have the body control. They don't have the physicality to do all that. But A.J. Brown, from the minute he stepped foot on the practice field here in Philly, has been absolutely ridiculous, incredible. He might be the most talented receiver in Eagles history, so we're very, very lucky to have him, and I'm sure it's a joy to watch him do what he does when you go back and look at the tape.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think we think of like what genius is. I really think that some of these athletes, the way that they understand physical space and the way they contort their body, it feels like genius. Like, it is absolute art. That one-handed catch against the Commanders was ridiculous. And actually going forward, I think through the rest of the season, there is a chance that those one-handed catches or those 50-50 balls to A.J. Brown, you know, maybe he doesn't come down with every single one of them, where Jaylen Herz is able to get a lot of production on those really, really hard throws. But I'd be much more happy with an offense that is happy to attack in that way.
Sure.
And, you know, you miss one, you miss two, you miss three there, but they're still able to push that ball down the field.
Last couple of weeks for the Eagles' rushing attack has not been – we haven't seen the same kind of run game that we've been used to now, really since Nick Sirianni took over. There are a couple of reasons for that. Cam Jurgens is supposed to come back on Monday night against Kansas City. I think obviously he's been key in opening up some things in the run game. Jaylen Herz feels a little bit better. He says the knee isn't bothering him. The bye week, he said, couldn't have come at a better time. So I think when you throw all those ingredients in there, maybe the run game will look a little bit better. But what were you seeing as to some of the reasons why it maybe wasn't taking off in the way we've become sort of accustomed to?
Yeah, the running game is such a fragile thing where if just one little thing goes wrong, you know, the play can end up in a loss or only a gain of 1 or 2. Where in the passing game, everything can go wrong, and if Devonte Smith burns a guy, it doesn't really matter. So what I guess if you could be happy about it, it's not just that it's like, okay, this specific player is a huge problem for the entire team. We cannot run behind this player. Even with replacing Cam Jurgens, I thought, you know, they did a decent job at that right guard spot. I do think they're very happy to have Jurgens back. I've been really happy with how DeAndre Swift has run, even not having the same production as that Vikings game. I do think there's that huge continuity issue at offensive line. Whenever you think of the Eagles, you really think of them built strong up front. And they've tried a lot of different things where they're not just running straight at you. They'll get into different run concepts. So for me, that feels like them telling us, hey, we know that we're not doing the best job here. We're going to try and work it in different ways. And whenever you have a quarterback like Jaylen Herz, who can really attack on the ground when he is fully healthy, it makes linebackers just a bit slower, but they can be a little bit more aggressive right now, knowing that Hertz has not been as healthy. So every time I watch it or whenever I note it down, it always feels like it's something different, whether it's, you know, this offensive lineman didn't get in the spot maybe as quick as they would have wanted to. You do want to see things, of course, going forward really get cleaned up, especially against a Kansas City team that is strong on the back end, that up front, that maybe, you know, this is hopefully that get right game for the Eagles up front.
Is it as simple too as just like if Hurts' knee is that much better that it can open up more of the box?
I wish. I think that teams now do a better job. So, for example, the Dolphins did a really good job when the Eagles are running their kind of zone read concepts, where if the defensive end crashes, the quarterback keeps it. Teams will just tell the defensive end, hey, go chase the running back. We're going to have a linebacker work over the top of that and be right there waiting for Jaylen Herz. So I do think that defenses are a little bit smarter than on the opposite. And I do actually like that Brian Johnson he'll get into those 2 running back backfields from shotgun. He'll have Dallas Goedert when he was there running into the flat. So your horizontal stretch of the defense is coming from a different element of the offense. So I think that that's been a good thing on our end to see, you know, even if Hertz isn't able to run at full speed, you can use different kind of pieces of the offensive weapons to stretch the defense in that way.
All right, you're talking about verticality and horizontal. Maybe the most basic run play of all time is the tush push. Are you a fan of that?
I mean, Pat, I'm not going to pretend to have been an Eagles fan my entire life. You know, I'm obviously lucky to talk about them. I love it so much. And the reason why I love it, I think even if I didn't get the privilege of watching the Eagles every week, is because no one else can do it. Like, no one else can. The Eagles bring in a rugby coach. They have incredible strength up front. No one has Jaylen Herz there. And now you'll see other teams like the Cardinals last week. They have to bring in their backup quarterback to do it. And I imagine, the Chiefs are going to put a tight end there to try it. So I am pro it. And I don't understand when people say, it's not a football play. I consider myself modern football and passing and all this, but the roots of football is the tush push. So exactly. Not just because the Eagles are great at it, but it's not a broken play because no one else can do it. So once the rest of the league can do it, then maybe we can have a discussion, but not yet.
I'm glad to hear you say that, because it burns us up here in Philly, especially, that all these people around the country, they know that their team can't do it, and it makes them upset, because if their team did it, they wouldn't be talking this way. So I digress, but I'm glad that we're on the same page with that. As we head into the second half of the season, you mentioned Brian Johnson, new offensive coordinator, 9 games now under his belt. What would you like to see him do a little more of, maybe a little less of, in the second half of the season?
It's going to be a big question of how do they deal without having Dallas Goedert. And me on the outside, I forget that Dallas Goedert really is a top 5 tight end in the league, and he's such a threat over the middle of the field. So for me, I want to see what's the response in this huge 5-game stretch when Goddard's not there to attack the middle of the field. Is it something where they're going to spread the offense out more and then move A.J. Brown and Devonte Smith inside? I like that I saw some of A.J. Brown specifically in the slot against the Cowboys. So I want to see that kind of over and over, because there's really no one that I think can match up with A.J. Brown, specifically maybe those slot cornerback bodies. I want to see that. What are the different answers going to be in the run game? Is it as simple as, look, we get Juergens back, we can now start attacking more downhill? And there's going to be times over the next few games when, they're going to be down. I think that's something that's probably, unfortunately, true to say. So what are the passing concepts when it's teams are saying, look, we're not going to let A.J. Brown get 150 yards that game? Are there different answers to get Devonte Smith open? Whether it's, running him more horizontal, where he's forcing people to kind of chase him across the field in different ways.
All right, so that's the offensive side of the ball. We also got to talk about the defense, which has been up and down and all around. It's usually that way here in Philly. Some exciting parts of the defense, some not so exciting parts of the defense. But I think one guy in particular that has stood out, not only here in Philly but across the league, is first-round pick Jaylen Carter. Just explodes onto the scene. In playing less than 50% of the snaps on defense. It's been a joy to watch him do what he does at such a young age. It's almost like, how can this guy get better? He's only, 20, 21, 22 years old, and we're already seeing him as one of the best defensive tackles in the entire league. But what is it that he does that makes him so good?
I think right away you could see that he strings together moves from the first game that you see him, which I don't think you always see from rookie pass rushers, where he has a coherent plan of attack against the offensive, the offensive center, the offensive guard, whatever it is. If the guard is attacking him, he'll swipe off their hands, and he has moves where if they don't work, he knows how to counter off of that. So it feels like he's really a mature pass rusher in that sense, where he understands the different leverages and how to counter it. And I don't know what's going on in the water in Philly, where obviously Fletcher Cox is a historic defensive lineman. Then you got Jaylen Carter coming in, and it's such a treat because it makes life so hard for an offensive line, where now the center has to be really cognizant of where Carter is. Maybe the center moves to them, and you have Reddick and Sweat on the outside. So that defensive line room, I wish I could be in there and just see, are they looking at each other like, hey, which one of us is going to go ahead and get a pressure on this next snap?
When you look at the guys like Reddick and Sweat, I think people are looking maybe at the raw numbers and saying, well, it doesn't seem like they're pinning their ears back as much as they were last year under Jonathan Gannon. Now Shawn is the defensive coordinator. Are they doing things differently with those guys than maybe they were a year ago?
I think there's a little bit less of those just kind of 5-man fronts where you see all 5 defensive linemen, where you get a true one-on-one. That's, to my eyes, it feels like they're doing a little bit less of that. But I know it seems like those guys really are. They're just closers. I really think that Shawn has done a good job rotating pieces on his defense throughout. Partially, I think he's figuring out, okay, well, who's really going to be able to play? But, Pat, not a lot of teams in the NFL have realistic expectations that they're going to be playing in Las Vegas on Super Bowl Sunday. And the Eagles are one of those teams. So being able to, be a little bit healthier. And then they lean into, getting 50, 60 snaps for those guys in those more tight games. So I'm not sure how much it is different up front, but I think that as we kind of continue on, obviously that Cowboys game, not the best game for that defensive line. I think they're going to hold that, and they're going to be able to act in different ways going forward.
I'm sure you know this. I know you haven't been an Eagles fan for a long time, but here in Philly, they just don't put a whole lot of emphasis into the linebacker position. But I think we should be pleasantly surprised as to what we've seen from free agent Zach Cunningham and free agent Nicholas Morrow so far this year. Nakobe Dean's been banged up. We haven't really gotten to see him at his best for a long stretch. But Cunningham and Morrow, it's those two guys basically are going to run the show from the middle of the field. What do you take away from what you've seen from them? And I guess, can it continue? Because these guys were free agents for a reason. They did come in on one-year deals for a reason.
Yeah, you forget sometimes when you're watching them that exactly that. Free agents, these weren't players that were on teams throughout, and they're obviously, Cunningham's at a different part of his career. Every defense will kind of filter, like the offense's passing attack will go to certain spots because that's your weakest part of the defense. And linebacker is unfortunately across the league one of those spots, and it makes sense from a team-building aspect. And I know Howie Roseman is really, really good at his job, but I'm encouraged, especially between how they're dealing with things in the run game. And like I said, decide using that rotation. I do wonder how it's going to be these next few games with Dean out. Are Morrow and Cunningham, they're going to get attacked a lot, as they should from an offensive standpoint. It makes sense that those are the guys that you want to attack. But the Eagles' defensive line, they're able to make life a little bit easier for the linebackers. Offensive linemen aren't just climbing right to Morrow and Cunningham and able to make those plays. But there are times where Morrow and Cunningham, they run downhill really, really fast, and they make plays in the backfield. The questions obviously come up, in the pass game. And then, what kind of tools does Desai have to take a little bit of the load off of those guys when the ball is in the air?
And then finally, we just kind of worked our way offense to defense all the way to the back into the secondary. I think, Darius Slay still playing at a pretty high level, but I would say James Bradbury has been a bit of a disappointment, and now you've got to throw in Kevin Byard. There's been a lot of injuries on the back end of the Eagles' defense. I think that's probably the one spot where if there is I wouldn't say it's a weakness. The linebackers are probably the weakness on defense, but so much is put on the shoulders of that secondary with the way the Eagles play. Can they hold up throughout? I think it's going to be a great test here, obviously, with the Kansas City Chiefs. But when you look at Bradbury and when you look at putting Byard out there with Blankenship and maybe throwing him out there with even Sidney Brown getting more snaps, what do you want to see from the Eagles secondary that's a little bit different in the second half than the first?
Overall, I think that, like thinking first from the coach level, I think Shawn Desai has actually done a really good job, to me, showing just different looks. He isn't someone who's too proud to change things up. I think that if you were watching Eagles film every week and saw them kind of getting beat on the same exact coverages, that would be really frustrating, but they're getting beat even when changing things up. I do think that, that slot cornerback position, it's so tough across the league because you kind of have to be involved in the run sometimes. You have receivers, the offenses put their best player there. The receiver can go both ways, so that makes it really hard. And then on the secondary, they very clearly play like and understand that their defensive line is usually going to get pressure, so they play a little bit more aggressive, where you see Bradbury trying to attack a slant, and when the offense can protect and run a slant and go, that becomes a problem. So I do think some of those secondary issues can kind of melt away a little bit when that defensive line is winning. But in games, we saw it against the Cowboys a ton. When the other team's offensive line is able to protect, teams are going to feel comfortable attacking the secondary. And I feel like, as an Eagles fan, I'm sure the one thing coming back from last year is you want a defensive coordinator where they're going to do different things in different situations. We watched that Dolphins game where Shawn Desai put together just an awesome game plan. I feel confident in what Desai is doing, but obviously, it's always going to kind of come down to what is the player on the field able to make.
No doubt about it. That was like the quickest 20 minutes of my entire life, Shawn. But before you go, how did you get so deep into the film aspect of football?
Well, Pat, I've been very lucky. I think I've had people in front of me, like obviously, you talk about Shield, people that have written about football from a really, really strong level. My brother was a coach. He came back and coached me, and I know you love football so much. There's just so much. It's such a cool, like, problem solving aspects to it, whether how do you figure out how to stop Travis Kelce, or how do you make sure that Jaylen Hertz is playing the highest level? So I feel like I've been lucky in people that have given me resources, and it's some people, Pat, probably call our obsession a little bit unhealthy, but I would say it's the greatest game in the world. So just being able to watch film one day at a time and learning something new every day.
I love it. Shawn Syed, Sumer Sports. You can check him out there. And your Twitter, always love when you're dropping those little nuggets, those plays that you see that kind of spark your interest. It's really great stuff. And tell Sheil that I said what's up. Thanks, dude.